Hello and welcome back to TraegerMethod Oil Painting. When I started doing these videos, I promised myself that I would only do the narration once, one take, straight through, start to finish. With this episode, I am breaking that commitment because of technical problems. For some reason, I did a first take, and when I finished the recording, I looked at it and the audio went, 2/3 of the way through the video, then it was over. And it's not that it stopped, it had stopped in the middle in different places. So I don't know what was going on, but I listened to it and it didn't make sense because there were gaps. I have no idea why. And I don't want to research right now. I don't want to go into a YouTube or an internet search to try and figure out why it did that. I'm just going to do another take, and I'm just going to say that no matter what this take is, this is the one that's going to stay. If it's cut up, if there's some issue, if it falls apart, then I'm going to say, hey, that's the way this one is, and we'll solve it in a future episode. I'll put in music if there's extra time with no narration. So that's what's going on my end, okay? We're looking at a painting started, I don't know when, 10 years ago. I mean, I have paintings in rotation for decades. This one has so many paintings underneath that I can't even tell you. I mean, it used to be called Lily Pad BMX, this painting. And now there's no lily pad, there's no BMX track in it. That's how long it's been in play. This is the final pass, though. I'm moving towards a finale with this one. It's definitely not there yet. It's got a ton of work yet to do. If a painting isn't good, if it doesn't excite you and thrill you, it's not finished. Keep working. That's a Traeger method truth. If it's adding interest, keep resolving issues. I've talked in past episodes about the concept of Faerie painting or Faerie aesthetics. F-A-E-R-I-E, Faerie, the realm of Faerie, the mythical realm of the fairies, an extra dimension, the fairy dimension. Since I was a small child, I've always been obsessed with elves and fairies. I'm doing a contemporary fairy painting. I've abandoned the tropes of the Victorian genre. The garden fairy. Look at that mullet thing I have on. That mohawk, that greasy mohawk. Apologize for that. Sorry you had to see it. But what is contemporary American fairy painting? You know, if Victorian fairy painting is little flower fairies, with rosy cheeks, hanging out in gardens, what is contemporary American fairy painting? Can fairies live in strip malls? Can fairies be mixed race? Can fairies be... Can they live in strip mall America? I consider David Lynch to be a fairy artist. His movies are very much about hidden realms, hidden worlds beneath the surface, just off to the side in your periphery. I was thinking about, I think it's in the movie Mulholland Drive. I might be wrong. It might be a different Lynch movie. I have to think about this. But there's a scene where a character is describing, I barely can recount the scene right now, but it's a character is describing an encounter with some kind of being, some kind of spirit realm creature near a dumpster behind this kind of diner in strip mall Los Angeles. I remember being very taken with the idea of there being creatures from the spirit realm living and interfacing, breaking through in a setting like a strip mall in the United States, a parking lot in the United States. It kind of spoke to this idea of all places are sacred. Just as all people are sacred potentially. That's why racism is such an abomination on so many levels, on every level. But in particular, I think denying, like, all human beings have access to the imagination in the same proportions. It's equally distributed amongst all races, classes, etc. Maybe not classes. Sometimes I think rich people have to be rich because they have no imagination, or they cannot access it. So they have to try and make the world the thing that they can't imagine. That's just an idea I've had before. But it's equally distributed. Art bears this out. If any racist said that, white racist said, "Oh, black people don't have as much imagination," you're just, oh, that's why they don't make good art, good music. It's like, well, that's obviously patently ridiculous. All people have equal access to the imagination. We are portals to it. And for my money, the imagination is the closest thing we're going to get to God. That is God, in my mind. I mean, every God that's ever existed in the imagination. That was the realm that God existed in. Any God that you can conceive of is experienced in the imagination. So I'm just thinking, like, doesn't that make the imagination itself? It's the kingdom of God. Or the queendom of God. It is God. To me. Well, of equal access to make a person's life difficult, stressful, horrible, to end a person's life, to turn that person into a product, is to deny, is to put an impediment between them and the imagination. And that to me is the greatest sin you could do, the greatest sin. And imagine being some creative little kid, full of wonder, full of hope. Not even hope, no, not even hope, just full of wonder, childlike wonder. Just imagination running wild. Like I just picture myself essentially. I'm like a 10 on the crazy artist scale, the obsessed Imagineer scale. What if I was born into abject poverty somewhere in the world, into a family, living on a dump in the Philippines? How much harder for me, it's so hard for me to carve out time and supplies to make art as it is. Imagine having those roles. And imagine being a kid growing up, you're born into, I mean, I have felt profoundly offended by the fact that I've hardly ever had health care in my life. Like how offensive that is and ridiculous. That offends the hell out of me. as an artist. I haven't had that because I don't, I haven't had steady career type. All my jobs have supported my art career, my art struggle. So I've never had insurance. But then you think, and then that hurts my soul. But then I think, well, what about being, black in America? 1,000 times, it's that times 1,000. It's that plus you can be legally murdered, harassed constantly. Let's say you got pulled over by the cops for the 40th time in your life. How hyped up would you be to go home and do fairy painting? You'd want to go home and just drink or punch a wall or just sob. These are impediments to the expression of the imagination. These are impediments to the most basic things of life, most basic pleasures of life. These are it's a crime against humanity, straight up. One of my missions has always been to make fairy painting inclusive. Have everybody's in there, and not just everybody, but every place is in there. Did I already talk about this, or did I talk about it in the take that I scrapped? I'm not sure. But I was thinking about that David Lynch scene with the dumpster behind the diner, and there being like a kind of spirit creature back there. I was thinking about how space is also put on a hierarchy. Trash location. You're in some suburb somewhere at a Ross Dress for Less, and you're standing in the parking lot, and you look over at some little corner, and there's like a broken chunk of asphalt, a Pepsi cup, and a broken lighter that somebody stepped on. And you look around, and there's just cars everywhere, and you go, what a trash place this is. What a non-place this is. Kind of place you just want to leave. Geography of nowhere. America, strip mall America. And I think to myself, can fairies live there? Can there be elves there? Or do elves just hang out in rich people's gardens? Or just hang out in the woods, beautiful places? Do they just hang out in places where there's flowers? I mean, it's easy to find fairies in a flower garden. It's harder to find them in a Ross Dress for Less parking lot. But you can find them there if you exercise your imagination enough. I mean, it's like the idea of beauty, like the idea that like some things have beauty and some things don't. And you recognize that. That's how you find beauty. No. You find beauty the way you find meaning. You train yourself to see it in everything. You train yourself to see it all around you. I mean, we've been taught that there's a holy land, which implies there's other places that are less holy. I mean, sometimes people will say, I'll hear some, people say, you go to Europe and be like, oh, Europe's so great. I love it. Everything's so old. In America, everything's brand new. And you go, no, no, no. That's not true. This is an ancient land. Ancient, just as old as Europe. There's not castles and shit. But you can go to New Mexico, Arizona. You can go to Utah. You can see Indian ruins, hundreds and hundreds of years old. This is an ancient land, if you don't see it with the colonial eye. Listen to a thing about Reconstruction. I think it was Fresh Air, NPR. Guy was talking about Reconstruction, and he was saying, the era post-Civil War. And he was saying, from Reconstruction to 1960, the 1960s civil rights movement, about 100 years. And essentially that was like 100 years since, slaves are free, and then Bill of Rights, etc. It took 100 years to get to the place where people were like, okay, now we actually need to live out these ideas, like these laws, actually enforce them, have some kind of like, but that took 100 years. Let's get to 1968, about 52 years ago. Let's just say 50 years ago. And now we're at another place where we're like, hey, it has not moved far enough. Not even close. Let's recognize that we have a police force whose job it is to enforce racial lines, racial laws, racial myths, racial prejudice. This has to change. It has to. It has to change. Doesn't work. Racism devalues and belittles everyone, including the racist, including the beneficiaries of white supremacy, of which I am one. It belittles us all. It hurts us all. It's got to go. It sickens the soul. You notice too that the same people that are really invested in white supremacy, the power elites that are invested in it, they're scammers, earth rapers, I mean, the fascists are always out to destroy the planet too. I mean, obviously there's like eco-fascists and all that kind of crap, but generally speaking, they want to destroy life on Earth. It all goes hand in hand. It's all about this idea of separateness. It doesn't work that way. I mean, this idea that we could like, oh, a white homeland or whatever. A happy world where some people are completely oppressed and denied. I think that's like a real thing that can like be functional long term. That's like saying, oh yeah, we can just keep making plastic forever and filling the oceans and don't have to change that. And let's dig up every little bit of fuel, fossil fuel, and burn it, and that'll be fine. It's like, no, it's a death trip. It's a total death trip. It's against life. Racism is against life. Capitalism is against life. It's against the imagination. It's opposed to it. I'll see. I take a very pessimistic view in general of, the material world. Like, it doesn't look good for us, right? I tend to always wear two hats. The one hat is total engagement in the world, and the other one is this is all a dream. Those are the two ways I go. It's all a dream, and it's totally real. But then I think, well, when you're in a dream, like a literal dream at night, that's pretty real. I've had lucid dreams where I've acted like a jackass, and I've thought to myself, well, why am I acting like a jackass in this lucid dream? Why is it so different than in my waking life? I'd want to act like a good person I want to be a good person in my waking life. Why not be a good person in my dreams? Why not have some ethics? My attitude is like, let's say this is a simulation. Let's say this is some kind of dream or hallucination. Then do your best. Whether or not there's any winning involved. Sometimes I've had this thought, like, what party do you want to be at the end of the world? Let's say it's all ending. What party do you want to be at the end of the world? Sitting around with Rush Limbaugh smoking cigarettes or cigars, with Donald Trump and Rush Limbaugh. Like, yeah, that's a fun party. Like a Mar-a-Lago with like all these bizarre fascist zombies, creeps, cretins, tasteless people. Or would you want to be with like a bunch of cool people, like having a good time together? Black, white, brown, yellow, blue, everything, all people together. Making music, having fun, eating good food, being interesting, celebrating yeah, that's the party I want to be at. If it's the last day on earth and those are the choices I get, yeah, I don't want to be, what party and that's the question, I guess, the thing I'm getting at is the question to ask yourself. Let's say there is no winning. It's a marriage of heaven and hell. It just goes back and forth between the two. Then just ask yourself, what party do you want to be at the end of time? I want to be at the cool party, not the shitty one.